Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you all had a good lunch and thank you for coming back. And we have a set of four interesting talks in the post-lunch session. Just to give you an introduction, I am Tarun Menon and I am a PhD student at the Center for Ecological Sciences at ISC, and I've been part of this organizing this symposium for the last 2 years, but I've been a participant from year one as well. Without further ado, let me introduce the first speaker. Our first speaker is Pavithra Sundar, who's going to be telling us more about how she leveraged BirdNET, which is a acoustic bird tool, and what insights she's gotten into it on species vocalization patterns across India. So over to Pavithra.
Hello everyone, I am Pavithra Sundar and today I'll be presenting the preliminary findings of our study on leveraging BirdNet to gain ecological insights into species vocalization patterns across India. Passive acoustic monitoring now stands as a powerful tool to monitor biodiversity and support conservation applications. It collects information of all the sounds in the environment called soundscape, which can then be used for multi-scalar analysis. In PAM, autonomous recorders are deployed in the field which monitor biodiversity in a non-invasive, cost, and time-efficient manner across broad spatiotemporal scales, providing a distinct advantage over traditional surveys. However, this increased ease of obtaining data across multiple sites and days means that vast amounts of data can be accumulated. Currently, the analysis of such data progresses in two major directions. One, involving the annotations of vocalizations of species of interest, and second, summarizing entire soundscapes using acoustic indices. However, there is surmounting evidence of inconsistencies in the performances of such indices across various biomes, taxa, and acoustic environments. That leaves us with the analysis involving identification of individual species. However, manually annotating species vocalizations can get very time consuming and can also limit the amount of data that can be processed or even species that can be studied. Thus, automated approaches represent a potential solution to annotate large amounts of data and can help address this main bottleneck in acoustic studies. Among these automated approaches, the openly accessible and easy to use tool, BirdNet, particularly stands out. BirdNet is an automated classifier that can scan through vast amounts of soundscape data and recognize species by their vocalizations. It can now identify around 6,000 global species of birds. How does it work? After you input all your data into BirdNet GUI, you can choose from a variety of parameters to analyze your recordings. Most notably, you can select the target species that you'd like to identify by either providing it with a custom list of species or by filtering the most likely species by location using the eBird data. Then BirdNet divides your recordings into 3-second snippets and generates predictions for each of those segments. These predictions are accompanied by confidence scores which range from 0 to 1, which reflects BirdNet's confidence in accurately predicting the species. Since its development, BirdNet has become the go-to bird identification software by the scientific community, being employed to study various behaviors as well as to monitor species. However, its effectiveness remains to be extensively assessed, especially in tropical regions such as India, where there's a large number of taxa vocalizing simultaneously, and the varied context of noise ranging from firecrackers during celebration and loud horns from vehicles to bells of grazing cows. All of these provide a stark contrast to the soundscapes in North America and Europe, where most of the studies on BirdNet are from. These factors can influence BirdNet's performances. Thus, we hope to address this research gap by firstly understanding how BirdNet detects species common to locations along a gradient of human activities and populations from megacities like Delhi and Mumbai and intermediate cities like Guwahati and Tirupati to small towns such as Valparai and Kodaikanal. All these locations also represent a gradient of noise pollution. Secondly, we hope to use these BirdNET detections to gain ecological insights, especially into vocal activity patterns along this gradient. At these locations, we deployed acoustic recorders which collected data for every 20 minutes, for 5 minutes every 25 minutes, for 24 hours across several months from 2021 to 2023. But for this presentation, I will be talking about how we used BirdNet to annotate the vocalizations of two common species, red-winged bulbul and greater kaukal, and potentially use it to study vocal activity patterns. So after collecting all the PAM data and running it through BirdNet with a spatiotemporal species filter, we will link the confidence scores with the probability that a prediction is correct. To do this, we will review predictions across a range of confidence scores and indicate whether each prediction is correct or incorrect. Then we use a logistic regression model to relate the binary outcome of the validation process to the confidence scores and obtain the confidence scores threshold beyond which a desired probability of detections are correct. So this will give us a species and location specific threshold. All the detections beyond this threshold value can then be used to gain ecological insights. Here are some of our results. In the acoustic dataset from Guwahati, I validated 50% of the total BirdNet detections of red-winged bulbul and greater kaukal, and BirdNet detected both the species with over 90% precision. Logistic regression suggests that for red-winged bulbuls, detections above the confidence score of 0.248 have 90% probability of being correct, and detections above 0.596 confidence score has 95% probability of being correct. Similarly, for greater kaukal, confidence scores or predictions with confidence scores of greater than 0.262 have 90% probability of being correct, and confidence scores above 0.332 have 95% probability of being correct. We then use this confidence score threshold above which 95% of the detections are correct to filter out the detections and plot vocal activity patterns. These are our preliminary findings. While we would expect the vocal activities to show distinctive dusk and or dawn peaks, there seems to be no specific vocal activity patterns, diurnal vocal activity patterns of the two species. However, we find interesting patterns when we compare the vocal activities between weekends and weekdays. We find interesting spikes in vocal activity in the morning on weekends compared to weekdays, suggesting that these periods might be the ones which have low anthropogenic noise interference, and these species might be utilizing those periods to communicate. But further analysis is needed to prove this. While BirdNet did work well with the Guwahati dataset, the same cannot be said for its performance with the Kodaikanal dataset. A majority of the validated BirdNet detections were false positives, even though the number of detections were also low. And it was also not confident with its detections, as is seen from most of the detections having confidence scores from 0.25 to 0.6. I'd like to end this presentation by discussing the proposed next steps for our study. Through this project, we hope to use BirdNet to obtain location and species-specific confidence thresholds, which can then be used to study vocal activity patterns of species along a gradient of human influences throughout India. And prior research has suggested that anthropogenic noise and anthropogenic light can impact activity patterns, with urban birds singing more at night or at middays to reduce acoustic interference during the noisy rush hours of the day. And during this process, we anticipate that BirdNet might not work effectively in detecting certain species in certain soundscapes, like it did with the Kodaikanal dataset, suggesting that baseline classifiers may not work well even with a common species in certain locations. Lastly, I'd like to thank our funders, National Geographic Society and Survey NRF, for funding this project. Data collectors without whom such a pan-India study would not be possible at all. and Heli and Kunal for helping me run all the data through BirdNET and spending countless hours on their laptop running BirdNET. So, with that, thank you very much for your attention and time.
Thank you, Pavitra, for that very interesting talk. And I think questions will start coming in. I had one question about the pattern about where the greater Kokal was detected well in Guwahati, but not in southern India and Kodaikanal. Could it have something to do with how, I mean, there is a little debate about the species also, right? That the one in peninsular India is called the southern kukul and the ones in the north is the greater kukul. Is there some vocalization difference between the two species, and maybe the data was trained on individuals in the north rather than including a lot of data from the south? Just something that came to my mind.
Yeah, that's definitely an interesting point. That is a pattern that we observed for red-winged bulbuls as well. However, I think it's also with respect to like, is our red-winged bulbuls even prevalent in Kodaikanal? So they're more prevalent in Kodaikanal than compared to Guwahati, which is why it might be detecting more. But also the fact that since you mentioned like Greater Kaukal and Southern Kaukal, it may not may not have been trained on say the dialects of species from different regions, which is something that we also want to look at. And that is why we're looking at like a pan-India approach to see how well it is detecting in different soundscapes and also accounting into in fact the dialects. So yeah, that's definitely an interesting point.
Preeti has a question. What is the likely explanation for the difference between locations for detection scores?
Yeah, so it's the same thing. So when we look at species specific and location specific thresholds, we look at the location specific threshold so that we can account for dialects as well, rather than going like a global species threshold, like a whole India species threshold. We want to look at location specific as well so that we can account for dialects and possibly even like different species, or like how different is it detecting, and also the differences in soundscapes. Since Kodaikanal is also a little bit more, it's not a very well developed city compared to Guwahati. Guwahati is more of an intermediate city compared to say Mumbai and Delhi. So there's also a difference in soundscape which we can account for when we are setting location specific and species specific thresholds.
Right. And we have time for one more question. We have one from Nirjesh who says, "Hello, wonderful presentation. I just wanted to ask about the possibility of ruling out bird mimicry. Is it even relevant or significant?"
It is difficult to rule that out. However, when we are validating, if we come across something like that, then we can score it as 0 and plot it and look at the confidence score threshold. That is the only way that we can do it. Or we'll have to manually annotate the data and look at the recall rates, which is another tedious process to look at the same question in two different directions. But yeah, that is definitely something that we cannot rule out.
Right. Okay, there's one last question which I think shouldn't take too much time. Was there any, which Soumya asked, was there any reason for choosing these two species other than them being widely distributed?
No specific reason. We had more than 10 detections of these species across all the locations. I understand that 10 might not be the number that we might have to go for. We might have to set a higher number than that, because then we'd be ending up with lesser number of detections to validate as well. But yeah, these species were having quite a few detections across all sites. So, which is why we went ahead with these species. There's no specific reason as such.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Pavitra. I will ask the audience to continue the conversation on Discord, and
Sure.
we can move on to our next topic.
Thank you so
Thank you,
much.
Pavitra. Our next speaker is Aditi, and she will be telling us about the urban soundscapes and tree richness and how they shape bird diversity in Dehradun, India. Over to Aditi.
Hello everyone, my name is Aditi. I work with Dr. Monica Kaushik on an urban ecology project in Dehradun. Today I'll be sharing a study on how anthropogenic noise and vegetation structure shape bird species composition in urban green spaces. Urbanization is considered as one of the most powerful drivers of global transformation. As cities continue to grow, natural habitats face increasing human pressure. So, urban green spaces are areas within cities, such as parks, gardens, campuses, and even urban forests, that provide both ecological and social benefits. So, while urban habitats have developed largely under human influence, along with delivering essential ecosystem services like cleaner air, cooling, or recreational spaces for people, they also support biodiversity by acting as refuges to plants and animals to survive and reproduce. So, loss of natural habitats often means two things for the species. Firstly, either to adapt to these new conditions, or secondly, to vanish. So these urban spaces mostly support a variety of generalist species. At the same time, urban areas are also home to several threatened species. So both common and threatened species are important for the urban ecosystem functioning and contribute to a wide range of ecosystem services. As the cities stand, it is important to focus on the existing green spaces to improve their biodiversity. So one of the most pressing challenges in urban ecosystems is anthropogenic noise. Several studies show that urban noise affects not only human health and well-being, but also has significant impacts on birds, influencing their communication and behavior. With rising urbanization, noise sources have also increased. So noise pollution can significantly alter bird community composition and their foraging behavior. Since vocal communications is vital in passerines, anthropogenic noise often masks these signals, forcing birds to adapt mechanisms like the Lombard effect, which simply means to increase their voice in noisy backgrounds. So, like we humans learn to speak from our elders, similarly in birds, song is a learned behavior, and it is essential for communication with mates, with offsprings, with conspecifics, and even other species. In birds, most importantly, their calls function as territory defense and mate selection. So, both of which can be disrupted in noisy urban environments. Studies have found that some species tend to actively avoid such spaces because of their calls being masked, reducing their chances of communication, whereas there are also other species that adapt by shifting their call frequencies or even their call timings. So, understanding how birds respond to such disturbances is therefore key to recognizing the role that urban green spaces play in supporting avian diversity. The studies highlighted that birds respond differently to noise, from reducing vocal activity during peak hours to abandoning noisy habitats. So we examined the relationship between anthropogenic noise levels and bird species richness across the city of Dehradun in 2023 and 2024 in both breeding and non-breeding seasons. At the local scale, studies have found that habitat heterogeneity in the form of vegetation structure increases richness and diversity, while native vegetation with large old trees have been found to improve bird species richness. On the other hand, exotic species, which are mostly prepared for the beautification of cities, had a negative relationship with bird species diversity. So we therefore investigated how vegetation influences bird species richness, since vegetation is a positive driver of avian diversity in cities. We conducted our study in Dehradun, the capital of Uttarakhand, situated in the Himalayan foothills. Since gaining statehood in the year 2000, the city has gone urban expansion, a rapid urban expansion, resulting in the loss of agricultural lands, forests, and open areas. For our study, we covered 18 urban green spaces, which include 6 educational institutes, 4 city parks, 4 residential complexes, 3 office parks, and 1 abandoned tea plantation. We surveyed bird communities using the point transact method across all the 18 sites. Each survey lasted 7 minutes, following 3 minutes of acclimatization. All birds seen and heard were recorded. So each site was revisited 4 times with at least 1 week's gap in between the next visit. To have an overall sense of the ambient noise of the urban green spaces, we recorded noise levels both during the bird surveys and at other times of the day, including peak traffic and evening hours. We measured noise levels using a calibrated device called a sound level meter. We adjusted it daily at 94 decibels to ensure accuracy. The device was programmed to take 1 reading every 2 seconds, and each site was sampled 3 times across both seasons, similar to the bird sampling. For each urban green spaces, we estimated bird, tree, and shrub richness, along with average noise levels. We also tried visualizing noise level data to check for variations across seasons. We compared the noise levels of all sites across seasons using box plots. The noise levels ranged between 40 to 65 decibels, with Gandhi Park registering as the highest noise level area in both seasons. The summer season had a slightly higher noise level. However, the distribution pattern of noise is quite similar in both seasons. We applied linear models to evaluate the influence of local scale variables like trees, shrubs, and noise on bird richness. Across these sites, we recorded a total of 121 species for the breeding season. So we built multiple models, and shrub richness alone explained more than 50% variance in bird richness. Upon combining the effects of tree, shrub, and noise levels, it explained more than 60% of the variation in bird richness. Analysis for the breeding season is still ongoing. So through the graphs, we can see that tree and shrub richness have a positive association with bird richness, whereas there is a negative relationship between bird richness and ambient noise. We applied non-metric multidimensional scaling, NMDS, to examine how bird species composition varied across local scale variables. While performing this analysis, we removed the species that were rare and vagrant and were only seen during, once during the survey. We used trees, shrubs, and noise variables at the local scale and used the size of the urban green space variable at the landscape level. With a goodness of fit or stress value of 0.13, we have a reasonably good representation of how bird community assemblages were distributed across habitat types. The results suggest that the small green spaces had relatively similar bird species composition. The large and medium-sized species overlap with each other completely, suggesting similar bird composition. The small spaces are likely dominated by the generalist urban-tolerant species, which you can see, like common mynas and pigeons. However, the large and medium-sized spaces indicated spaces supporting specialist and forest-associated species due to higher vegetation richness and area. From the analysis so far, we can say that sites with more trees and shrubs actually support more bird richness. One interesting finding here is that shrub richness is the strongest variable among the 3 local scale variables in explaining bird richness. However, it is important to note that areas with minimal to no management of shrubs has been seen to support more bird densities. So suggesting that habitats of such type be kept away from beautification. At the same time, it is evident that increasing noise levels are responsible for declining species richness. Uh, the recent State of India's Bird Report 2023 assessed a total of 942 birds, out of which it was found that more than 200 species are under decline, particularly evident among the habitat specialist types, uh, including open habitats. So, therefore, understanding which habitat features improve the biodiversity value of urban green spaces, future studies should focus on a way to effectively quantify urban features like noise, which is still less explored, and thus this can guide urban planners and managers in designing and maintaining more effective urban greening projects. I would like to express my sincere gratitude to Ajim University, Bangalore, the Rufford Foundation, Farrell, and all the people who have contributed to this study and supported the project's success. And I appreciate the opportunity to have learned from them. Thank you.
Hi, Aditi. Thank you for that very interesting talk on how shrubs and trees and sound can affect bird diversity. We have one question from Preeti already, where she asks, do you think that noise should affect bird activity, in brackets, example, vocal activity, rather than species richness?
Did you think that noise should I think this so effect of noise might be different for different species. So similarly for the activity thing, there are birds with low frequency calls and there are birds with normal or high frequency calls. So the birds with low frequency calls might face the issues of noise more than the other rest of the birds, right? So yes, there are studies that have found that uh, like birds that used to call in the morning hours have shifted their calls to evening hours. So there are studies that have found these differences. So uh, a study is still required in our landscape, so we haven't done it yet. So there's a scope of understanding that effect in our Indian subcontinent.
Right, right. Piyush asks the next question. Did you get a chance to study the impact of high noise events like Ganesh Festival or Kavad Yatra that are over a defined time span?
Okay. So we specifically avoided uh, like days like this. So we had this rule that during even high windy days, we avoided collecting noise data because then it spikes the noise levels, right? And then it's an error in the whole data sheet itself. So yeah, we avoided days like this. So the data that we collected was based on normal everyday noise levels.
Right. I had one question. Was this like, so you had one or two sites which had slightly higher decibel levels than the other sites. Were the
Yes.
species at those sites very different from the species in the less loud sites? Is there any correlation between sites that were louder and the vegetation of those sites? Just wanted to know what that was like.
Okay, yeah. So you must have seen the NMDS plot that I have created, right? So there you can see the smaller size parks have similar species composition, right? So similarly, most of the smaller species parks were in like surrounded by residential plus uh, noisy in the sense like roads were near to those areas, like uh, so. Yeah. So yeah, species were similar in those areas. And sorry, what was the another?
No, just
part.
so
That is
basically you're saying the smaller parks were also the louder parks, and so they had very similar sort of
kind of.
birds.
So you not necessarily, but yeah, the size mattered. Plus the vegetation in those plots were more or less similar with beautified trees. So species that were found in those areas were also like similar.
Okay.
Yeah, mostly the generalist smaller species. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much, Aditi. We're out of
Thank
time.
you. Okay.
You can continue engaging with people on Discord. I'm sure more questions will come up on the thread. So thank you. Thank you again, Aditi.
Thank you.
We will now move on to our next talk, which is going to be given by Aamir. I'm guessing a lot of our participants may have at some point taken part in the passage migration count in Kachchh, Gujarat. And Aamir is going to give us an update on what their insights are from the last 2 years of monitoring passage migration in Kachchh. So over to Aamir.
Hello everyone, my name is Aamir and I'm delighted to share with you the story of the Passage Migrant Count. This is a citizen science initiative that started in Gujarat, but as you'll see, its impact goes far beyond a single state. Our focus is on monitoring stopover sites, which are critical places where migratory birds pause on their incredible journeys. Now, I suppose there are people from various backgrounds, so I'll keep my talk simple, but I hope it will give you a sense of why these stopover sites matter and how a collective movement like PMC can make a difference. Let me take you back why we even thought about this project. If you see at the map, Gujarat lies in the middle of the Central Asian Flyway and East Africa West Asia Flyway, which are important migratory routes in the world. Every year, birds travel thousands of kilometers across continents. Some breed in Central Asia or Europe and winter in Africa. But on the way, they must stop, refuel, and rest. Without these stopovers, they simply cannot survive. But here's the catch. Most research and conservation efforts tend to focus on either the breeding grounds or the wintering sites. What happens in between has remained poorly studied, even though it may be the most vulnerable part of their journey. That's where Kachch comes in. This region acts like a service station on the highway. It gives birds the food and energy to continue the migration. Yet, surprisingly, we had no systematic data on these passage migrants until now. So in 2022, we launched the Passage Migrant Count, for which the idea was very simple but ambitious, to conduct a coordinated survey to monitor these stopover sites. And as far as we know, this was the first initiative of its kind anywhere in the world. From the very beginning, we wanted this to be more than just a survey. We wanted it to be a citizen science movement. And the response has been overwhelming. Birders, students, researchers, photographers, and even forest officials from across India have joined us. People traveled from many states to be a part of this survey. This diversity of participations has been our strength. It shows that when people care about birds, they don't need to be professional scientists to contribute. In fact, the richness of PMC comes from this blend. Citizen scientists collecting data systematically, guided by robust protocols. So in many ways, PMC represents citizen science at its best. Our main objective is to understand passage migration. Now, what do I mean by that? Not all migratory birds stay for the winter in India. Some are what we call passage migrants, which pass through India briefly, especially during autumn and spring, on their way from Asia to Africa. Think of it this way. If you are on a long road trip, you may stop at some dhaba for just one meal or for some rest before continuing. That's what these birds are actually doing. They are here for a short time, but that stop makes all the difference for their survival for their upcoming journey. Between August and October, Gujarat and Rajasthan serves as bottlenecks with thousands of birds moving through. Documenting these birds is exactly what PMC set out to do. To give you a real example, let's look at this European roller named Hera. which was tagged and tracked by BirdLife South Africa. If you can see here, the red line shows the spring migration, and the yellow one shows her autumn migration. She travels thousands of kilometers across multiple countries and ecosystems. Now, if you imagine if just one stopover site like Kachchh is degraded or lost, it can affect her entire survival. That's how interconnected migration really is. And protecting birds here in India has consequences that ripples across countries and continents. The passage migrant count is helping to fill the critical gaps also in migration science. First, it identifies the key stopover habitats. Second, it reveals the timing, when exactly birds are arriving and departing. And third, it helps build a clearer picture of the flyways itself. Most importantly, this information supports data-driven conservation decisions. For example, the local forest department can use these findings to prioritize certain patches of forest, certain grasslands, or certain wetlands for these passage migrant birds or resident birds in general. And we don't work in isolation. PMC also complements national efforts such as the State of India's Birds Report, the Asian Waterbird Census, and other citizen science programs. Together, they form evidence base for protecting birds. So how do we actually collect this data? Our approach is very simple, but also standardized and robust. The surveys are carried out over 2 days during peak passage. Teams walk along fixed routes and grids. All sightings are logged in real time using the eBird mobile app. In addition to recording bird species, we also note the type of habitat, the level of effort, the coverage, and even the weather conditions. This ensures that data from different teams and different years can actually be compared. It's simple enough that anyone can participate, but structured enough that the data has real scientific value. So for 2 years, for 2022 and 2023, we analyzed the PMC data sets and published the results. These publications highlight the patterns of passage migration, including species diversity, timing, and habitat use. Across both years, a team surveyed more than 250 grids with more than 1,000 eBird checklists and recorded more than 230 species of birds, including the passage migrants as well as the resident birds. Using these data, we were able to extrapolate the abundance of each passage migrant bird. In September 2022, we estimated around 3 lakh passage migrants passing through Kachchh during just 2 days of the survey. And the following year, this number almost doubled to an estimated 5 lakh birds. It really makes us think about the scale of migration and the importance of these stopover sites. In 2022, we estimated around 1,82,000 European rollers passing through Kachchh, while in 2023, the number was around 3.5 lakhs. Similarly, we estimated the count for other species like the spotted flycatcher, rufous-tailed scrub robin, greater white-throat, red-backed shrike, and common cuckoo. When mapped, the results also reveal fascinating patterns. The spotted flycatcher showed distinct concentrations in southern districts of Kachchh. You can see the maps for spotted flycatcher over here. While the European roller was distributed more widely across regions favoring open landscapes. These insights are helping us to understand how different landscapes within Kachchh support different migrants. Interestingly, we also found differences between the 2 years. This may have been because the surveys were conducted 2 weeks apart or due to unique weather conditions to those years. Either way, it shows that migration is dynamic, and to truly understand it, we will need repeated surveys across seasons and over the long term. Another impact of PMC has been the communication. and it has brought the passage migrants into the headlines. Our work has been recognized by Bird Count India, eBird, and Gujarat Forest Department, and also the online and print media. This visibility helps decision makers to see the importance of these stopover sites, and it helps build a wider community of people who care about migration. In just 3 years, PMC has grown far beyond our expectations. We have generated more than 1,000 eBird checklists. We have trained over 200 birders to conduct systematic surveys, and in 2024, we ringed around 100 birds, giving us another layer of information about their movements. But this is only the beginning. Our vision is to institutionalize PMC under India's biodiversity monitoring programs so it continues for decades. We want to develop outreach modules for schools and colleges, inspiring the next generation of conservationists. And eventually, we hope PMC can serve as a global model, showing that it's possible to monitor passage migration in a standardized way. To conclude, the passage migrant count is more about than just data. It's about collaboration, awareness, and action. Stopover sites may look ordinary to us, a patch of a grassland, a small wetland, but for a migratory bird, they are the difference between life and death. By joining hands, we can ensure that India's critical stopover sites are protected and the miracle of migration continues for generations to come. And at last, I would like to thank my entire team without which this wouldn't be possible. Especially Shri Uday Vora, who is a retired CCF with Gujarat Forest Department, and Mr. Kunan Nayak, who is an advocate with Gujarat High Court. They have truly been the backbone of this survey. I would also like to thank Dr. Arpit Dev Murari and Ashwin Vishwanathan, who have been instrumental in developing the methodologies, refining our mapping approaches, and leading the analysis of the data. I would also like to thank Naushad and Mayuri, who managed the logistics and planning on the ground, ensuring that our surveys ran smoothly and efficiently. And of course, to all the participants from across India who have joined us in the field. Finally, I also thank Forest Department of Gujarat for their continuous support and encouragement in making this initiative a success. Together, all of you have made the passage migrant count what it is today, and I'm honored to share this journey with you. Thank you so much for listening. I look forward to your questions now.
Hello, Amir. Thank you for that amazing talk. And I myself have been a participant in the passage migration count last year, and it was really lovely to hear all of what you found and all those results. Amir, are you here?
Yes, I'm here. I'm
I'm
listening.
sorry. Okay. So I guess Amir can't turn his video on, but he will be taking questions. We have one question from Preeti who asks, can you give us a sense of the heterogeneity in the landscape? You pointed out the difference in the roller and the spotted flycatcher distribution across districts. Is this because of some nuance in the habitat differences?
It could be what you stated, but we are still in the pipeline to guess these assumptions. Like we yet don't know because these surveys. So if we count, like we have the data only for 4 days, for 2 years. So we need more such surveys, and we need such long-term monitoring to conclude this probability. What we assume. So what? I have just put the two maps only for European roller and spotted flycatcher. So what we found out for European roller was that it uses more of open landscapes. So if you travel by road, you will see more European rollers. So we also counted the frequency of reporting in each checklist. So that is why it should be possibly it should reflect that, like the frequency of reporting some species is more. So for spotted flycatcher, you have to be in the field. Like the frequency of reporting of spotted flycatcher is less than the European roller, because European roller we found more in open landscapes, in on pylons and electric wires and all. But for spotted flycatcher, it has a special need for a habitat. Like it needs a special habitat. So it should be because of that. But to be sure, we still need more monitoring to be done.
Yes, that makes sense because if I remember correctly, the spotted flycatcher is generally in more scrub sort of habitats, what I
Right,
remember, and the European roller was more in the grasslands and
right,
more open habitats. So that
right.
makes sense. I had one question about, so can you tell us a little more about that estimate, those number estimates that you've come with? Have you just added all the numbers across all the different teams that have gone and counted birds, or is there some estimation technique that's going on?
Yes,
Just was
we
curious
we
about
we
that.
calculated the mean count for each passage migrant and all the passage migrants for in each region and all across Kachch. So we extrapolated the data, assuming that in 1 kilometer checklists. So the participants moved along the Transact for 1 kilometer. So we counted for 1 square kilometer for each passage migrant, and then we extrapolated the number across regions and as a whole of Kachch district. So that is the extrapolated number that we came across.
Right,
It could be less, it could be more,
right.
but
Because
we
also of the habitat heterogeneity, so all the birds aren't going to be everywhere, right?
yes. So that is why we also excluded the blue-cheeked bee-eater from the analysis, because it has the tendency to aggregate in certain places. So we excluded the blue-cheeked bee-eater from the analysis thing.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Amir. We're out of
Yeah.
time. I'm sure more questions will come on Discord,
Sure.
and I hope that you will be able to continue on Discord with all the other participants who might have
Absolutely.
questions.
Thank you so
Thank,
much. Thank you for
thank you,
having me.
Amir. So now we will move on to our next talk. Our next speaker is Pragyan, and he will be telling us about avifaunal abundance and diversity in the Najafgarh Jheel, recent trends and diversity patterns.
Hello everyone, my name is Pragyan and the topic of my short talk is avifaunal abundance and diversity of the Najafgarh Jheel. Wetlands are often called biodiversity hotspots because of the crucial ecosystem services they provide, such as flood control, water purification, and serving as important habitats for migratory birds. However, when we move into city environments, biodiversity patterns change dramatically. Urban ecosystems act as strong filters on bird communities, creating very distinct assemblages compared to natural habitats. The focus of my study is the Najafgarh Jheel, a wetland with a very peculiar history shaped almost entirely by human intervention. Back in the 19th century, it stretched across more than 230 square kilometers, but in the 1960s, it was drained by the Delhi Flood Control Department. The exposed lakebed was then converted into farmland by local communities. Over the years, however, the unique topography of the area and stormwater inflows from the wide catchment combined with wastewater discharges from the rapidly expanding urban centers of Gurgaon and Manesar, led to the wetland being replenished. Today, Najafgarh Jheel stands as a classic example of a novel ecosystem, an ecosystem that has been reconstituted through human actions, reflecting the Anthropocene reality of irreversible socio-ecological changes. There are two objectives that I tried to address through my research. The first objective was to analyze recent trends in avifaunal diversity of Najafgarh Jheel using validated citizen science data, which is the secondary data, and the primary data, which I use to estimate avifaunal diversity and species composition of Najafgarh Jheel. 8 vantage points were selected along the boundary of the Jheel while keeping a minimum distance of 1000 meters to ensure that there was no overlap of data. The red dots are the vantage points, 3 along the course of the road and 3 along the agricultural fields. The perimeter of the area was approximately 20 kilometers. Standard bird census techniques were adopted and the stations were surveyed using the vantage point method. Distance-based sampling methods were adopted to estimate bird densities and abundance. The detection function model was used for detection probability and density and abundance estimates. For the secondary data, I selected eBird checklists from the last 5 years, recording a minimum of 35 different species. This benchmark was set to ensure that the consistent representation of observer effort and birding efficiency was maintained. Moreover, the reliability of the eBird data comes from the fact that all checklists undergo expert review and validation by experienced birders and volunteers within the eBird platform. A total of 252 bird species had been recorded from the secondary data collected from eBird checklists from 2020 to 2025. The 252 birds could then be further categorized under 9 broad functional groups based on feeding habitats, such as granivores, herbivores, frugivores, nectarivores, insectivores, omnivores, etc. The first thing that I wanted to see from the eBird data was the cumulative accumulation of species throughout the years. As we can see in the graph, there is a steady increase in the number of species identified each year. In 2020 and 2021, we see a noticeable jump of approximately 7 to 8 new species, which show a strong initial survey effort. In 2021 and 2022, we see a smaller rise, which may suggest reduced sampling efforts or fewer easily discoverable species remaining. We must also remember that this was the COVID year, so fewer people went birding because of the restrictions and lockdowns. In 2022 and 2023, we see a sharp rise again, which might indicate expanded sampling, improved methods, or even more biodiverse area survey. Lastly, in 2023 and 24, we see a slow but positive increase, which hints towards the species pool nearing saturation, but not completely exhausted. All in all, there had been a steady increase in the number of species each year. Expanding on the results of 1.1, I further broke down the results to get species accumulation curves of each season. Both the winter and spring seasons show a steep initial rise and then a gradual leveling off. But on the other hand, the curve of the monsoon season shows a steady and consistent increase. This hints towards the fact that newer bird species are constantly being discovered using the Jheel during the monsoon season. Now, the curve of the summer season has fewer data points because there weren't enough checklists that passed the 35 species benchmark during those years. Hence, it looks a little weird than its brethren. The next thing I tried to do with the eBird data was see seasonal migration and residency of the birds. For this, I looked at all the data points and checked the presence and absence of a species during one season. The result was that in the years 21 and 22, we saw a good increase in the resident population from the 9.2% in 2020. However, the numbers reduced back to 9.3 and 9.4 in 23 and 24. I believe this happened again due to the COVID situation and restrictions. The 2025 data shows a different data pattern because the data collection goes only up to the month of April 25. The resident migrant data can be looked at in a better way using this plot. The vertical columns are the years and the horizontal rows are the species. Straight away, we can see that the year 2021 had the strongest record of resident birds, which included black-winged stills, the grey francolin, the house crow, little cormorant, little egret, and the purple heron. Coming to the results of Objective 2, the primary data that I collected recorded a total of 102 birds during the course of 5 months. The most abundant birds were the greater flamingo, the black-winged still, the bar-headed goose, the Northern shoveler, and the black kite. The least abundant were the oriental pratincore, the Eurasian curlew, the streak fever, the red-headed bunting, and the Indian thickney. Using the distance sampling data, I first tried to get the detection probability curve of birds in the Najafgarh Jheel. We can see that the detection function starts at 1 at 0 meter distance and it gradually starts decreasing, with a rapid increase after the 60 to 70 meter mark. This shows that more birds were detected at nearer distances and the numbers start falling as we go further away. Now, using the abundance data, I calculated the diversity indices for the Jheel. The Simpson's, Shannon, and Peelew's evenness index results were 0.740, 2.882, and 0.604 respectively, which translates to the population being moderately diverse, rich, and fairly evenly distributed. I further went and calculated the diversity indices for each vantage point to show within habitat variability. We see that point 2 has consistently recorded lower values, which indicated inadequate sampling or actual habitat change. I would like to vouch for myself and say that it was not the first one. Diving deeper into the distance sampling data, I calculated the detection probability, density, and abundance of the birds there. The probability of detection is 0.65 and the density of birds per hectare is approximately 34. And after running all the data through R, I found the density estimates of the top 10 birds, which we can see in the plot on the right. We can see that the blackwing still leads the pack from the front. After fiddling a little more with the abundance data, I made a cluster analysis for species associations using Ward's hierarchical clustering technique. This is a dendrogram of 62 bird species based on feeding gill, foraging habitat and technique, body size, and migratory status. We can distinctly see that clusters are emerging, such as piscivores, granivores, aerial insectivores, and scavengers. This functional grouping reflects overlapping of niche and resource partitioning. I want to bring everyone's focus on the whitewashed flamingos of the Najafgarh Jheel. The Jheel holds the majority of the flamingo population of the NCR. Records indicate as many as 500 individuals have been spotted in the Jheel. Flamingos are always found in the deeper sections of the wetland, which gives them the habitat they need for foraging and also protects them from predators. During the lineal seasons of the year, however, for example, the summer and the monsoon season, they migrate to nearby wetlands. I say this with confidence because I'm continuing my research for this, and the last time I visited the Jheel was last week. And yeah, there were no flamingos. The extreme inundation of the Jheel had driven the flamingos away to nearby wetlands such as the Basai wetland. Regardless, the primary data that we collected indicates that the flamingos have set up an almost permanent residency in the Jheel, because if you visit the Jheel, chances are you might just see a flamboyance of flamingos, an extravagant name for an already exotic bird. Now I have proof that the flamingos are not there and the Jheel being completely inundated if people don't believe me. These are two pictures I took last week of my field site. The water level was above the road, which meant that the car couldn't go any further, not just a car or any car. And the only way the flamingos could have stayed in the Jheel was if they were driving around in custom made flamingo Mahindra Thars. Now, these are some discussion points that I want to address in front of everyone. When we look at urban environments, they act almost like evolutionary filters. Only certain bird species thrive here. For example, now these are some discussion points that I want to address in front of everyone. When we look at urban environments, they act almost like evolutionary filters. Only certain bird species thrive here. For example, species like sparrows and pigeons. What gives them disadvantage are traits such as fearlessness, flexibility in behavior, and the ability to quickly adapt to new situations. This connects to the idea of multi-species urbanism mentioned by Jamie Lorimer in his book Wildlife in the Anthropocene. For example, crows and mynas don't just survive in cities, they actually adapt socially and behaviorally to human infrastructure. They learn our routines, exploit our ways, and in a way, they weave themselves into our daily urban life. But not all environments shaped by humans are beneficial, which brings me to an important point. Is the Najafgarh Jheel an ecological trap? We know that the Jheel constitutes of wastewater from the nearby cities. Reports from the Central Pollution Control Board tells us that the water is actually toxic. So the bioaccumulation in these birds will definitely affect their breeding and life cycles. My question is, are they falling into an ecological trap? Are these birds coming here to die? This brings us to a bigger philosophical question. Should we continue holding on to the romantic idea of untouched, pristine wilderness? Or should we start thinking differently and embracing the vision of a half-wild rambunctious garden, very eloquently explained by Emma Maris in her book Rambunctious Garden, where nature and human management coexist in messy hybrid ways? Now, these are the people I would like to thank for helping me throughout the research. My professor and supervisor, Professor Suresh Babu, the Center for Urban Ecology and Sustainability, and the colleagues who work there. Ananya, who did not know at that time that she was creating an entirely new world of curiosity in me, which ultimately led to this research, and the Environment and Development faculty of Ambedkar University, Delhi. I'm grateful. Thank you.
Hi, Pragyan. Thank you for that talk. And yeah, I visited Najafgarh Jheel a few months ago, and I too did not see a flamingo in a Thar. So
Correct.
I think you have a point there. We have a question from Ananya, couple of questions from Ananya. She asked, why did you choose feeding habits to make the functional groups? And why did you use Ward's method for cluster analysis instead of Jacquard's method?
Okay, I'll answer the first question first. I grouped the birds of Najafgarh Jheel into functional groups based on their feeding habits because diet directly reflects their ecological role in the wetland. Feeding gills are widely accepted method in avian ecology as they simplify complex bird communities, and they also show key ecosystem functions that the birds have. For example, seed dispersal, pollination, and pest regulation, and other nutrient cycling. And since wetlands are primary feeding grounds, this classification is most relevant for understanding the ecological health and conservation needs of that site. And on why I use Ward's method over Jacquard's method, Ward's method is designed for quantitative abundance data because it minimizes the total within cluster variance, resulting in compact and interpretable clusters. And since I use abundance data instead of presence absence data, Ward's method is more appropriate to reflect both the similarity in community composition and also relative abundance of species. Whereas on the other hand, Jacquard's method is typically used for binary data, where you're only interested in whether a species is present or absent, regardless of how many individuals are recorded. So using Jacquard's method on abundance data would discard and disregard important ecological information about dominance and also rarity.
Okay. Yeah. And we have one question from Arnav who asks that you mentioned flamingos going to Basai. So were surveys done in Basai as well?
So I did not do a survey on Basai, but there was a paper in 2021. Two researchers went and did a survey of the flamingos in Basai wetland, and this data has been referred to that paper. I did not specifically go to Basai, even though Basai is hardly 15-20 minutes from the Najafgarh Jheel. But that's not the research that I partook on.
I had one question, I mean, more of a suggestion. Maybe since you were looking at the trends in the bird richness across time over the 5 years time, maybe
Yeah.
you could use some metric like frequency of occurrence of different species to look at how our species actually were there. Like at least you'll have some idea of the actual abundance of birds rather than how many
Okay.
people actually went there and birded. So just a suggestion that you could
I,
use to look
I
at how trends across years.
I did try to incorporate this into my research, but the thing is, eBird data, not everyone mentions the number of species or individuals that of each species that they encounter. So in many checklists, the numbers are XX and not
Right.
actual numbers. So if I were to do an abundance count on the
So actually
checklist,
what you can do is what a lot of people with eBird data do is you remove all the abundance data and then just use presence and absence. So if there are 50 checklists from a certain point in time, you see that the bird is there, say 45 times versus the next year is there only 20 times. That gives you a rough idea of abundance, that if it was there 45 out of 50 checklists in 2020 and then only in 20 out of 50 in the next year, that could tell you that there were probably more birds in 2020 versus
that's also
2021.
correct.
So
That's
you
a
could
smart
do
way of
something
looking at
like
it.
that. Yeah.
All right, I'll keep that in mind.
Cool. So we're out of time, and that brings us to an end of this session. Thank you so much, Pragyan, for presenting that work.
It was my absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
Okay.
So that brings us to an end for today. And I'll thank everyone for participating in all the talks and keep making it such a lively conversation. People can continue interacting on Discord, ask questions on the different channels, on the short talks, on the speed talks. Keep interacting over here, and we will see you again tomorrow at 9 a.m. We have a very interesting panel discussion lined up at 9 a.m. So please join us tomorrow. Thank you so much.
Streaming as well.